Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. I will be asleep, deep enough that I do not know I am dreaming. And then something happens that makes me wake up. Or at least, I think I wake up. Sometimes it is a sound. Sometimes it is the feeling that someone is standing in the room. Sometimes it is a door opening, a knock on a wall, footsteps in the hallway, or something falling somewhere in the house. Sometimes I will just suddenly open my eyes with the feeling that something is wrong, even though I cannot immediately explain what it is. At first, everything seems normal. I am in my bedroom. I am in my bed. The room is dark in the same way it is dark when I wake up for real. I can see the furniture, the walls, the shape of the window, the faint outline of my dog nearby, or whatever else is normally there. I can feel the sheets under me. I can feel the weight of the blanket. I can hear the silence of the house. For a few seconds, I fully believe I am awake. Then something terrifying happens. That is when I realize I was never awake in the first place. The worst part is that I do not always realize it immediately. Sometimes I will lie there for a while, trying to calm myself down, telling myself that I had a bad dream and I am safe now. I will look around the room and see everything where it should be. I will tell myself that I am in my own house, in my own bed, and there is nothing to worry about. Then I will notice one small difference. It might be something simple. The door to my bedroom will be open when I know I shut it before I went to sleep. The window will look slightly wrong. The ceiling will be too high. The hallway outside the room will be darker than it should be. Something that normally sits on a shelf will be missing. A piece of furniture will be turned at a strange angle. The room will look exactly like mine, but not completely. That is usually when the fear starts creeping in. At first, I will try to ignore it. I will think maybe I am still tired. Maybe I just forgot how I left something. Maybe the darkness is making the room look unfamiliar. But the more I look at it, the more obvious it becomes that something is wrong. Then the dream turns. The thing I thought was a normal room becomes something else. The familiar house stops feeling familiar. The darkness outside the window becomes too deep. The hallway becomes too long. A sound starts somewhere far away and gets closer. The room begins to feel like a copy of my real bedroom, built by something that understands the basic shape of it, but does not understand how it is supposed to feel. And then I wake up again, or I think I do. I will suddenly sit up in bed, breathing hard, completely relieved. I will look around and tell myself, okay, that was it. That was only a nightmare. I am awake now. But I am not. I am still inside another dream. That is what makes these episodes so bad. It is not just a nightmare. It is the feeling of being trapped inside a nightmare that keeps pretending to end. Every time I wake up, I believe I have escaped it. Every time I convince myself that I am back in reality, something happens that proves I am still dreaming. Then, the whole cycle starts again. When I was a kid, this happened to me sometimes too. Even back then, I had nightmares that felt more vivid than normal. I had dreams where I would wake up in my room, then find out I was not really awake. I would see something strange, something impossible, or something terrifying. And then I would wake up again only to discover that I had fallen into another layer of the dream. But when I was younger, I had a method for getting out of it. I do not remember exactly how I came up with it. Maybe I had read about it somewhere. Maybe another kid told me. Maybe it was just something I started doing because it seemed to work. I had a way of forcing myself out of the dream and back into reality. It was probably something small, like trying to move one finger, focusing on my breathing, or forcing my eyes shut and open again. Whatever it was, it helped. When I was a child, I could sometimes recognize what was happening. I would think, this is not real. I am dreaming. I need to do the thing that wakes me up. And somehow, I would eventually break through it. The nightmare would end. I would wake up in my real room, terrified, but safe. I would lie there listening to the quiet, looking at the familiar shape of the furniture, waiting for the fear to settle. It usually took a while, but eventually I would be able to convince myself that I was really awake. As I got older, though, I forgot how to do it. Or maybe I remember the idea of it, but I cannot remember the exact method in the moment. When I am trapped in one of those false awakening cycles now, I do not think clearly enough to use anything I might know. I am too caught up in the fear, too convinced that what I am seeing is real. I am 38 now, and it still happens. Not every night, not constantly, but often enough that I know the feeling when it begins. Sometimes I will wake up and immediately feel that something is wrong. I will have that sick feeling in my stomach before I even open my eyes fully. I will hear a sound in the house or feel the air in the room change, and part of me will already know that I may not be awake. That is one of the worst parts. The possibility that I am still dreaming becomes its own source of fear. When I wake up in the middle of the night now, I sometimes have to check things. Not in an obsessive way, but enough that I can convince myself I am actually awake. I will look at the clock. I will touch something solid. I will listen for my dog. I will turn on a light. I will look at my phone. I will check whether the room is the way it is supposed to be, because in the dreams, everything looks almost right. Almost, that is what makes it so convincing. In a normal nightmare, you might be somewhere impossible. You might be in a strange building, a forest, a house you have never seen before, or some situation that clearly does not make sense. But in these dreams, I am usually in my real house. I am in my real bedroom. I am in the same position I fell asleep in. Sometimes I wake up in the dream lying exactly the way I wake up in real life. Sometimes I wake up sitting up in the dream because I had fallen asleep sitting up in real life. Sometimes I wake up with the blanket twisted around my legs exactly the way it is in reality. Sometimes I can feel the mattress beneath me, the cold air against my face, the familiar weight of my own body, and the silence of my house around me. That is why it messes with my head so badly. The dream does not feel like a dream. It feels like reality with one mistake in it. And sometimes the mistake is so small that I do not notice it at first. Maybe the bedroom door is open a few inches wider than it should be. Maybe the light from outside is coming from the wrong direction. Maybe my dog is not in the place where he normally sleeps. Maybe the sound of the refrigerator downstairs seems too loud. Maybe I hear a voice call my name, but it sounds like it is coming from the wrong room. Maybe I look toward the hallway and see a shape standing there, but when I blink it is gone. In the dream, I try to explain it away. I tell myself I am tired. I tell myself my eyes are adjusting to the dark. I tell myself that the sound came from outside. I tell myself that old houses make strange noises. I tell myself the wind moved something. I tell myself that the shadow is only a coat hanging on a hook, a tree branch against the window, or some shape created by the darkness. Then something happens that makes it impossible to keep pretending. A door will move when there is no wind. The shape in the hallway will step forward. A voice will say my name again, closer this time. The room will suddenly become silent in a way that feels unnatural. The lights will go out even though they were already off. Or I will look at the same object twice, and it will be in a different place. That is when I know I am dreaming. But knowing I am dreaming does not always help. Sometimes it makes things worse, because once I realize I am dreaming, I start trying to wake up. I will force myself to move. I will try to scream. I will try to sit up. I will try to shake myself awake. I will think as hard as I can, wake up, wake up, wake up. Then I will wake up, or I will think I have. I will sit up in bed, relieved, heart racing, sweating, shaking, and fully convinced that I am finally back in reality. I will look around the room. Everything will be normal. For a few seconds, I will feel safe. Then I will notice the difference again, and the nightmare will start over. The longer it happens, the worse it gets. The first false awakening might only be mildly frightening. Maybe I hear something in another room. Maybe I see a shadow at the end of the hall. Maybe the room feels wrong, but nothing directly attacks or threatens me. But by the second or third awakening, the fear becomes more intense. The dreams seem to understand that I know something is wrong. They become more aggressive. I will wake up and see the door open. I will tell myself it is only a dream. Then something will come through the doorway, or I will wake up and hear someone walking through the house. I will tell myself I am awake, but the footsteps will stop right outside my bedroom. Or I will wake up and see my dog standing in the room, but something about him will be wrong. He will be too still. He will be facing the wrong direction. He will look at me in a way he never does when he is awake. Those are the ones that get to me, not because I believe my dog is frightening, but because he is one of the things that normally makes me feel safe. In real life, he is a comfort. He is company. He is proof that I am not completely alone in the house. When I wake up for real and hear him move or see him lift his head, it helps ground me. But in the dreams, even that can be twisted. Sometimes I will call for him, and he will not come. Sometimes I will hear him moving in another room, but it does not sound right. Sometimes I will see him sitting somewhere dark and still, and I will know before I even look closely that it is not really him. That is when the dream becomes unbearable, because everything I would normally use to reassure myself turns into part of the nightmare. The room is not safe. The house is not safe. The familiar objects are not safe. Even the dog is not safe, at least not inside the dream. And then sometimes sleep paralysis gets involved. That makes everything much worse. In sleep paralysis, I become aware that I am awake or partly awake, but I cannot move. I can see the room, or think I can see it. I can hear things around me. I can feel myself trying to lift my arm, turn my head, sit up, or call out, but my body will not respond. I know what sleep paralysis is. I know it is a real thing. I know it can happen when the mind wakes up before the body fully comes out of sleep. I know people can experience hallucinations during it. I know they can see figures, hear voices, feel pressure on their chest, or sense something in the room with them. Knowing that does not make it easier when it is happening. When you are stuck in it, the logical explanation feels far away. All you know is that you are lying in bed and you cannot move. You can hear your own breathing. You can feel your heart beating. You can see the dark outline of the room around you. And you are convinced that something is nearby. Sometimes I see things during sleep paralysis. Not always clearly. Usually it is more like a shape. A tall outline near the doorway. A darker patch of darkness in the corner of the room. Something standing where there should be nothing. Other times, I hear something. A voice. A sound in the hallway. A knock. The slow creak of a floorboard that seems to be moving closer to the room. And I cannot get up. I cannot turn the light on. I cannot call out loudly enough for anyone to hear. I cannot even fully convince myself that what I am seeing is not real. That is when I feel the most helpless. Because even if I know it is sleep paralysis, I am still trapped inside the experience. My mind knows what it is, but my body does not respond. My fear does not respond. The part of me that wants to survive does not care whether there is a scientific explanation. It only knows that something feels wrong. Eventually, I will wake up for real. Usually, I do not know exactly how it happens. One moment, I am trapped in a dream, trying to wake up. Then suddenly, I am back. Actually back. I will open my eyes, and the room will be normal. The air will feel different. The silence will feel real instead of heavy. I will be able to move my fingers, then my arms, then sit up. Sometimes I know immediately that I am awake. Other times, I am still unsure. That is the part that can mess with my perception of reality for a while. After going through several false awakenings, waking up for real does not always feel convincing right away. I will sit there and look around the room, checking things. I will check the door. I will check the clock. I will look at my phone. I will touch the wall, the bed frame, or something else solid. I will listen for my dog. Sometimes I will get out of bed and walk around because I need movement to prove to myself that I am really awake. Even then, the fear does not immediately leave. It takes 15 or 20 minutes sometimes before the feeling fully passes. My heart will still be racing. My body will feel tense and shaky. I will have that deep, helpless feeling sitting in my chest, the same feeling I had inside the dream when I knew I was trapped but could not force myself to wake up. I will turn on lights. I will drink water. I will sit somewhere that feels more open. Sometimes I will put on a television show or some music, anything with normal voices and normal sound, because silence feels too much like the dream. And usually, my dog helps. Sometimes I guess I yell out in my sleep, even if I do not remember doing it clearly. Or maybe I make enough noise that he realizes something is wrong. He will come to me, climb closer, stand near the bed, or move around like he is checking on me. That is often what wakes me up properly. The feeling of him there is different from the dream version of him. It is solid, warm, real. I can feel his weight, hear his breathing, smell his fur, and know that he is actually there. That helps more than I can explain. But even after I am awake, I remember the dreams. That is another part of the problem. They are extremely vivid. The details stay with me for years. Some of them I have never forgotten. I can still remember rooms that do not exist, even though they were supposed to be my room. I can remember hallway shadows, strange sounds, people standing where nobody should be standing, and small details that seemed wrong before something horrible happened. I can remember dreams from years ago with a clarity that normal dreams do not have. Sometimes I will remember one randomly during the day. I will be doing something normal, driving, washing dishes, walking outside, and suddenly a scene from one of those dreams will return to me. I will remember the exact feeling of waking up in a false version of my house. I will remember the moment I realized I was still dreaming. I will remember trying to force myself awake and failing. It is hard to explain how exhausting that can be. You wake up feeling like you have escaped something, but your body still believes you were in danger. Your mind knows it was a dream, but your nervous system does not seem to get the message immediately. And because I live alone in a very rural area, it does not help. The house is quiet at night. really quiet. There are no nearby neighbors close enough that I can hear them talking, driving, or moving around. There are no streetlights outside the windows. There are no apartment walls with other people on the other side. Once night comes, there is mostly just darkness, trees, open land, and the sounds that come with living away from everything. Wind in the branches, animals moving somewhere outside, a distant dog barking, the house settling, the occasional sound of something against the side of the building. All of that is normal. But after a bad false awakening cycle, normal sounds do not feel normal for a while. A branch rubbing against a window can sound like someone scratching. An animal moving outside can sound like footsteps around the house. A distant noise can seem like it is coming from the hallway. The darkness outside the windows feels bigger because there is nothing beyond it except land and trees. When I have been stuck in one of those dreams, coming back to an isolated rural house does not always feel like relief right away. Sometimes it feels like I never fully left the nightmare. I know that is irrational. I know the house is real. I know I am awake. I know the sounds outside have normal explanations. But after waking up over and over inside a dream, being unable to trust your own bedroom for even a few minutes, it takes time for your mind to settle back into reality. I do not know why my brain does it. Maybe it is stress. Maybe it is the way I sleep. Maybe it is connected to the sleep paralysis. Maybe it is something that began when I was a kid and never fully went away. I only know that when it happens, it feels more real than any normal nightmare. The worst ones are always the ones where I wake up and everything is almost exactly the same. The room looks right. The bed feels right. The house sounds right. I convince myself I am okay. I convince myself I am finally awake. Then one tiny difference proves that I am not. And everything starts again. Eventually, it gets so terrifying that I guess I yell out, or my dog comes close enough to bring me back. Then, I wake up for real. I sit there in the dark, listening to my dog breathe, looking at the familiar room, and waiting for the terror to fade. And for 15 or 20 minutes, I have to remind myself that this time, I am actually awake. I kept the experience ambiguous and close to the original, with the roommate's comment as the final twist. I had an experience with sleep paralysis that turned into something I still think about years later, mostly because of what happened after I moved out. I had dealt with strange sleep issues before, nothing constant, but every once in a while, I would wake up and feel like my body had not caught up with my mind yet. I would know I was awake, or at least think I was awake, but I could not move properly. Sometimes I could open my eyes, but not lift my arms. Sometimes I could hear the room around me, but could not call out. It was terrifying the first few times it happened. But eventually I learned that sleep paralysis could make your brain do strange things. You can see things that are not there. You can hear sounds that are not real. You can feel like someone is standing in the room. You can feel pressure on your chest, or hear whispers, or see shadows in the corner. I knew all of that. I had read about it. I knew people often saw dark figures during sleep paralysis because the brain was still partly dreaming while the body was waking up. I understood the science behind it well enough that, when it happened, I tried not to panic. At least, I tried. But one night, it went much further than anything I had experienced before. At the time, I lived with a roommate. It was a normal enough place, nothing especially old or dramatic from the outside. Just a house we rented, with separate bedrooms, a shared living room, a kitchen, and all the usual sounds that come with living with someone else. Doors closing, cabinets opening, Someone moving around in the hallway late at night, a television going in the next room, water running through the pipes. There was nothing about the house that screamed haunted. Still, weird little things happened there from time to time. Nothing I could point to and say, that is definitely paranormal. It was more like the kind of stuff roommates joke about when they are trying to make a boring house feel creepy. Strange noises from a room nobody was in. A floorboard creaking in the hallway when everyone was sitting still. Something sounding like it fell, only for nobody to find anything. Shadows that looked wrong when you caught them in the corner of your eye. We never had a major incident while I lived there. Nobody woke up with scratches. Nobody saw a full person standing in the kitchen. Nobody got violently thrown out of bed. It was just little stuff. Things that were easy to dismiss if you wanted to dismiss them. And I usually did. I always figured the house made noises. Houses do that. Pipes knock. Wood shifts. Air vents click. You hear things differently at night when the rest of the world is quiet. Your brain fills in blanks. A shadow becomes a shape. A sound becomes footsteps. A door that is not fully shut moves slightly when the air changes. That was how I looked at it. Until that night. I remember going to bed like normal. There was nothing particularly strange about the evening. I was tired. Probably more tired than usual, but nothing had happened that would have made me expect a nightmare. I got into bed, turned off the lights, and eventually fell asleep. Then I woke up. At least, I thought I did. The room was dark, but I could see enough to recognize it. I could make out the outline of the furniture, the faint shape of the door, and the parts of the room where darkness was deeper, because the light from outside did not reach them. It looked like my actual bedroom, not a dream version of it, not some strange place that only resembled it. It was my room. I was lying in my bed, but I could not move. At first, I did what I always did when sleep paralysis happened. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that it would pass. I tried moving my fingers, then my toes. I tried to force myself to blink. I tried to focus on breathing slowly instead of panicking. My body felt heavy, not painful, just completely unresponsive. It was like I was trapped inside it, aware of everything but unable to do anything about it. I could feel the mattress under me. I could feel the weight of the blanket. I could feel my chest rising and falling, though breathing felt strange and shallow. I remember looking toward the ceiling. Then something changed. Instead of staying in my body, I felt myself pull upward. There is no better way I can explain it. It was not like I stood up. It was not like I rolled out of bed. It felt like I floated. 1 second, I was lying there in sleep paralysis, staring upward. The next second, I was above myself, looking down at my own body in bed. I could see myself sleeping. That was the first thing that made it feel different from normal sleep paralysis. I had heard people describe lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences before. I knew that dreams can make you feel like you are floating or watching yourself from outside your body. I knew that was possible. But knowing something is possible and experiencing it are two very different things. From above, I could see the room clearly. I saw my bed. I saw myself lying there. I saw the position of my body under the blanket. I saw my own face, or at least the outline of it, turned slightly to one side against the pillow. It was unsettling, but at first I was not afraid. That is the strange part. I remember feeling curious more than anything. I knew I was dreaming or hallucinating in some way. I knew sleep paralysis could do this. I knew I was probably caught between being asleep and awake. So instead of fighting it, I just looked around. The room was quiet. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed something behind me. Near the door to my bedroom, standing in the darker part of the room, was a tall black figure. It was not detailed. I could not see a face. I could not see clothing. I could not see hands clearly or make out what it was supposed to be. It was just tall, black, and human-shaped. It stood near the door as if it had been there the whole time. I should have been terrified immediately. A tall shadow figure in the corner of your bedroom is exactly the kind of thing people talk about when they describe sleep paralysis. It is almost a cliché at this point. You hear so many stories about people waking up unable to move and seeing something dark standing in the room. But for some reason, I was not scared. Maybe it was because I knew I was dreaming. Maybe it was because I had seen the kind of shadow hallucinations people describe during sleep paralysis, and my brain had already prepared me for it. Or maybe I was not afraid because the figure itself was not doing anything. It was just there. Watching, I remember thinking that if this was my own dream, then I could do whatever I wanted. I was floating. I was aware. I was not physically trapped in my body anymore, at least not from the point of view of whatever was happening. So instead of backing away, I floated toward the black figure. The closer I got, the stranger it became. At first, the figure looked solid, in the way shadows can look solid when there is no light around them. But then, as I moved closer, I noticed that there was something else there. A smaller shape. At first, it was almost invisible. It was like looking through thin smoke or glass. The tall black figure still stood near the door, but in front of it, or partly inside the darkness around it, I started to see the outline of a little girl. She was transparent, not completely invisible. I could see her shape. I could see that she was small, maybe the size of a young child, but I could also see the room through her. It was as if someone had drawn the outline of a girl onto clear plastic and placed her in the middle of the room. She was standing there looking at me, not the floating version of me, the body in the bed. She was looking down at me, sleeping. That was when things started to feel wrong. Up until then, I could explain everything away in my head. Sleep paralysis, a lucid dream, my brain creating a shadow figure, because I knew that was common. My subconscious turning the dark corner near the door into something human-shaped. But the little girl felt different. She was not threatening. She was not screaming. She was not moving toward me. She was just standing there, looking at my sleeping body with a kind of quiet attention that made me uncomfortable. I remember floating closer. I do not know why I did that. Curiosity, maybe, the same reason you stare at something scary in a movie even when you know you should look away. I wanted to see her better. I wanted to understand what I was looking at. The tall black figure behind her did not move. The girl did not seem aware of me at first. Her attention stayed on the version of me sleeping in bed. I could see my own body lying there. I could see how still I was. I knew I was trapped in sleep paralysis down there, even though my awareness was floating above the room. It was a very strange feeling, like I was split between two places at once. Part of me was hovering near the door, part of me was lying helpless in bed. The little girl continued to look at the sleeping version of me. Then I spoke. I said, "I see you." I did not shout it. I did not say it aggressively. It was more like I was testing whether she was real inside the dream. I wanted to know if she was only part of the room, part of the darkness, or whether she could react. The second I said it, her head snapped toward me. Not slowly, not naturally. It was fast, too fast. Her head turned sharply, and suddenly she was looking directly at where I was floating. That was the moment I became truly afraid. Before that, I had been calm. I had been curious. I had been thinking, this is weird, but it is only sleep paralysis. It is only a dream. But when she looked at me, It felt like she had not been supposed to see me. It felt like I had caught her doing something, and by speaking, I had made her aware that I was there. The fear hit me all at once. I did not wait to see what she would do. I did not ask another question. I did not try to float closer. I felt myself get pulled backward, almost like a vacuum had opened behind me. 1 second I was near the door, staring at the girl and the tall shadow behind her. The next second, I was being dragged back toward my body. Then I was back in bed. I woke up fully. My body jerked. I could move again. I sat up fast, breathing hard, trying to understand where I was. The room was dark and quiet. The door was shut. The corner near the door was empty. There was no tall figure, no little girl, no strange shadow. Just my bedroom, just the furniture, just the normal shapes of things in the dark. I stayed awake for a long time after that. I turned on a light. I looked toward the door more than once. I kept thinking about the way the girl's head snapped toward me when I said, "I see you." That was the part that stayed with me. Not the tall black figure, not even the feeling of floating above my own body. It was the fact that, in that dream, the girl had been focused on my sleeping body until I spoke. And when I spoke, she reacted. I did not tell my roommate. I did not even seriously consider telling him. It sounded too ridiculous. Even though it scared me, I knew what it probably was. Sleep paralysis can make people see figures. Lucid dreams can feel real. The brain is capable of creating incredibly vivid experiences when you are between sleep and waking up. That was what I told myself. I did not want to be the roommate who came out of his room and said, "Hey, I had a dream that I floated above my body and saw a transparent little girl standing near the door." So I kept it to myself. Life went on. I continued living there for a while. The weird little things in the house continued too, though none of them were dramatic enough to change my mind about anything. A sound in the hallway, a creak in an empty room, a light flickering, something moving in the corner of your eye. Nothing I could prove. Nothing that was more than an old house being an old house. Eventually, I moved out. Months passed. I settled into a different place, got used to a different room, different sounds, different routines. The old house became something I thought about less and less. The sleep paralysis experience stayed in the back of my mind, but I tried to leave it there. I never had another dream exactly like it. I never saw the little girl again. I never felt myself floating above my body again. After a while, I started thinking of it as one of those things that was scary in the moment, but probably had a normal explanation. Then, my old roommate came to visit. We were hanging out, talking about normal things. It had been months since I moved out, and we were catching up. I do not remember what we were doing exactly. Maybe we were sitting around talking, maybe watching something, maybe just talking about how things had changed since we stopped living together. The old house came up in conversation, not in a serious way. Probably just one of us mentioning something about the place. Then my roommate said something that made my stomach drop. He looked at me and said, "Bro, one night I came home and saw a little girl leaving your old room and walking into mine." For a second I did not know what to say. I remember staring at him. I had never told him about the night I saw the transparent little girl in my room. I had never mentioned the sleep paralysis. I had never described the tall black figure by the door. I had never told anyone in that house that I saw a childlike figure looking at me while I slept. So when he said that, it did not feel like he was repeating a story I had planted in his mind. He was telling me something from his own experience. I asked him what he meant. He said he had come home one night and seen a little girl leaving my old room. He said she walked out into the hallway and then went into his room. Not ran, not disappeared, just walked. like she belonged there. I do not remember every detail of how he described her, because at that point I was already too shocked to think clearly. All I could hear in my head was, "A little girl leaving your old room, my old room, the room where I had experienced sleep paralysis, the room where I floated above my body, the room where I saw the tall black figure near the door, the room where I saw a transparent little girl looking at me sleeping." I remember asking him if he was serious. He said yes. I asked why he never mentioned it before. He did not really have an answer. Maybe he thought he had imagined it. Maybe he did not want to sound crazy. Maybe he had only brought it up because enough time had passed and we were no longer living there. But the fact that he said it at all changed the way I remembered my experience. Before that, I could tell myself it was sleep paralysis. After that, I still could. I still do. Sleep paralysis is real. Lucid dreams are real. Hallucinations during the border between sleep and waking are real. A strange dream does not prove anything supernatural, and seeing something briefly in a hallway at night does not prove anything either. He could have been tired. He could have seen a shadow. He could have mistaken a coat, a reflection, or a person-shaped piece of furniture for a child. I could have dreamed the entire thing because my brain was trapped between sleep and waking. There are normal explanations for both of our experiences, but it is hard to ignore the overlap. I never told him about the girl before he mentioned seeing one. He never told me he had seen her until months after I moved out, and somehow both of us connected a little girl to the same room. I still do not know what happened that night. Maybe I was only dreaming. Maybe my roommate only misread a shadow. Maybe the house was full of normal noises and strange angles that made us both imagine things. Or maybe there was something in that house that neither of us understood. All I know is that I was floating above my own sleeping body during sleep paralysis when I saw a transparent little girl near the door. She was looking at me in bed. I told her, "I see you." Her head snapped toward me. And months later, without knowing any of that, my old roommate told me he came home one night and saw a little girl walk out of my old room and into his. About 20 to 25 years ago, when I was in 8th grade, my school took a trip to Washington, D.C. It was one of those big middle school trips that everyone spent months talking about before it happened. Teachers handed out permission slips, parents worried about the travel plans, and students acted like we were heading out on the biggest adventure of our lives. For most of us, it probably was. We were old enough to feel independent for the first time, but still young enough that staying in a hotel with friends instead of at home felt exciting. We were going to see museums, monuments, government buildings, historic sites, and all the places our teachers had talked about in class. But if I am being honest, most of us were probably more excited about being away from our parents for a few days, staying up late, eating hotel breakfast, and being allowed to hang out with our friends in a different city. The trip lasted around 3 or 4 days. I do not remember every place we visited in order anymore. I remember the usual things people remember from a Washington, D.C. school trip, a lot of walking, crowded sidewalks, buses full of tired kids, teachers constantly counting heads, and being told over and over not to wander away from the group. At night, we stayed in hotel rooms grouped in 4s. The rooms were not huge, and because there were 4 of us in each room, there was not enough bed space for everyone to have one every night. So we worked out a rotation. 2 people would sleep in the beds, and 2 people would sleep on the floor. Then the next night we would switch, so nobody had to spend every night on the carpet. It was not luxurious, but we were kids. Nobody cared much. We were tired enough by the end of each day that we could have slept almost anywhere. The particular hotel where this happened is something I cannot identify now. I do not remember the name. I do not remember the street. I do not remember whether it was right in Washington, D.C., or in one of the nearby areas where school groups often stay. I only remember that it was an older building, the kind that felt like it had been around for a long time. It had that slightly historic look to it. The lobby had old-fashioned details that seemed different from newer hotels. The hallways were wider than usual, but somehow darker. The elevator felt slow. The carpets were patterned in a way that looked dated even then. The doors to the rooms were heavy, and the walls seemed thicker than the walls in normal hotels. It was not creepy when we first arrived. It was just old. There is a difference. During the day, with teachers, students, luggage carts, and people moving through the halls, it felt like any other busy hotel. There were kids talking loudly, adults trying to keep everyone organized, and the smell of food or coffee coming from somewhere downstairs. We were too distracted by the trip to think much about the building itself. But at night, once everyone went to their rooms and the hallways became quiet, the hotel felt different. The room we stayed in was fairly standard. There were 2 beds, a dresser, a television, a bathroom, and a chair sitting in the corner. I remember the chair clearly because of what happened later. It was not a fancy chair. It was one of those padded hotel chairs with dark fabric and wooden arms, placed near the corner of the room where nobody really had a reason to sit. The beds were on one side of the room, and the chair was across from them, or slightly angled toward them. It sat close enough that you could see it easily from either bed, especially in the dark. That night, it was my turn to sleep in one of the beds. I remember feeling lucky about that because the floor was not comfortable. The other 2 guys had blankets and pillows set up on the carpet, and one of them had complained about how thin the hotel blankets were. We had all spent some time talking, laughing, making jokes, and probably trying to stay awake longer than we should have. Eventually, though, we got tired. We had spent the entire day walking around Washington, D.C. We had been on buses, in museums, outside in crowds, and following teachers from place to place. By the time the lights went out, everyone was exhausted. The room became quiet. There was still a little light coming in from outside, probably from the street or from another part of the hotel. It was enough to create faint shapes in the room, but not enough to see clearly. The beds, the dresser, the television, and the chair were all visible as dark outlines. I fell asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. I do not know what time it was the first time. I did not check a clock. I only remember opening my eyes and looking toward the corner of the room. That was when I saw someone sitting in the chair. At first, I did not think it was strange. I was half asleep. My mind was still foggy, and I did not immediately understand what I was looking at. I just saw a silhouette in the chair, dark against the dim room, but it did not look like one of the guys in our room. It looked older. The figure had the outline of a man wearing a suit and a hat, not a modern baseball cap or hoodie. It looked like one of those old-fashioned hats, a fedora or something similar. The broad shape of the shoulders and the angle of the head made it look like someone sitting calmly in the corner, dressed the way you might imagine a gangster from the 1930s. The closest comparison I can make is the stereotypical Al Capone look. A suit, a fedora, a man sitting with the kind of stillness that made him look like he belonged in an old black and white movie. I remember looking at the chair for a few seconds. Even then, I did not panic. I was exhausted, and I was still mostly asleep. My first thought was that one of the other guys had piled clothes or luggage on the chair. Maybe someone had put a hat on top of a bag. Maybe a coat was draped over the back, and the darkness made it look like a person. That was a completely reasonable explanation. We were 4 middle school boys in a hotel room. There were backpacks, jackets, shoes, snacks, sweatshirts, and random things scattered everywhere. It would not have been strange for someone to throw clothes onto a chair before going to sleep. So I rolled over and went back to sleep. I did not wake anyone up. I did not say anything. I did not stare at it until I was scared. I simply assumed it was a pile of stuff that looked strange in the dark. Maybe an hour later, I woke up again. This time, I remember checking the clock. It was around 4 in the morning. The room was still dark and quiet. The other guys were asleep. I could hear the soft sound of breathing from the beds and the floor. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I looked toward the chair again. It was empty. Not just empty in the sense that the person was gone. The chair was completely empty. There was no pile of clothes, no bag, no hat, no coat, nothing. It looked exactly like a normal hotel chair sitting in the corner. For a moment, I just stared at it. I remember feeling confused more than scared. My brain was still trying to fit the two moments together. The first time I woke up, I had seen what looked like a seated man in a suit and fedora. I had told myself it was luggage or clothes. But now the chair was empty, and I could not understand where those things had gone. Nobody had moved. At least, nobody that I noticed. The guys on the floor were still in the same places. The beds looked the same. The room was quiet. There was no sound of anyone getting up, moving things, or rearranging the chair. I remember thinking, maybe I had dreamed it. That was the easiest answer. I was tired. We had been walking all day. I was in an unfamiliar hotel room. I woke up in the middle of the night, saw a shape in the dark, and my half-asleep mind turned it into something more detailed than it really was. That made sense. So I rolled over and went back to sleep. I did not bring it up. Not that night. Not in the morning while we were getting dressed. Not while we were waiting for the rest of the group. I had convinced myself it was not worth mentioning. It was probably just a tired, half-awake moment. Maybe I had dreamed a figure in the chair because I had seen too many old movies, or because the hotel looked historic. Maybe I had imagined the hat. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. I did not want to be the guy who told everyone he saw a gangster ghost in a hotel room. We were in 8th grade. I knew exactly what kind of reaction that would get. The next morning, we went downstairs for breakfast. Like every other morning on the trip, there were students everywhere. Kids from different rooms were talking too loudly, teachers were trying to keep everyone together, and people were rushing to grab food before we had to get back on the bus. Our group from the room sat down together. We were eating, talking about the day ahead, and probably complaining about how early we had to get up. I had almost completely pushed the chair incident out of my mind. Then one of the other guys from our room said something. He looked around the table and asked, "Was someone sleeping in the chair last night?" I felt cold immediately, not just surprised. Cold. The kind of cold feeling that starts in your stomach and moves through your whole body before you have time to react. For a second, I did not say anything. I did not know if he was joking. Maybe he had seen one of us sitting there and did not remember. Maybe someone had gotten up in the night. Maybe he was talking about something completely different. But before I could answer, another guy from our room looked up and said something like, "What the hell?" I thought I was going crazy. I saw something too. That was when the whole table went quiet. The first guy said he had woken up during the night and seen someone sitting in the chair. The second guy said he saw a figure there too. They both described the same basic thing, a man-shaped silhouette in the corner, sitting in the chair as if he had been there the whole time. None of us had talked about it before breakfast. None of us had told the others what we saw, and none of us had a reason to make it up. We started comparing details. The figure looked like a man. He looked older than us, obviously. He seemed to be wearing a hat. He appeared to be dressed in dark clothes, something like a suit. He was sitting in the chair. The chair had been empty in the morning. I remember feeling my skin crawl. Up until then, I had been able to explain it away. I had been tired. I had woken up in the dark. I had seen a pile of clothes or a shadow. I had dreamed it. But now, two other guys had seen something in the same chair that same night. I told them what I saw. I told them I had woken up, seen what looked like a man in a fedora sitting in the chair, and assumed it was luggage or clothes. I told them I woke up again around 4 in the morning and saw that the chair was empty. The other guys looked at me differently after that. Not because they thought I was lying, because they had seen something similar. We all tried to laugh it off a little. That is what kids do when they are scared and do not know how to handle it. Someone made a joke about the hotel being haunted. Someone said maybe a teacher had come in during the night. Someone said maybe one of us had been sleepwalking. But none of those explanations fit very well. The door had been locked. Nobody had come into the room that we knew of. No teacher would have quietly sat in the corner of a room full of sleeping 8th graders at 4 in the morning, wearing what looked like a suit and fedora. And if one of us had been sitting in the chair, we should have known. There were only 4 of us. 2 were in beds. 2 were on the floor. Nobody remembered getting up. Nobody remembered sitting in the chair. Nobody found clothes or luggage arranged in a way that could explain the shape. The more we talked about it, the more unsettling it became. We were all young enough that we did not have a sophisticated way of thinking about sleep, dreams, shadows, or shared suggestion. We just knew that each of us had woken up at some point during the night and seen something sitting in that chair. Something that was not there in the morning. The rest of the trip continued normally. We went back out with the group. We saw the places we were supposed to see. We got on buses, followed teachers, took pictures, complained about walking, and did all the normal things kids do on a school trip. But whenever we got back to the hotel that night, I remember looking at the chairs in the room. Not just ours, any chair. Every dark corner suddenly felt more interesting than it should have been. I do not remember whether we stayed in the same room again after that night, or whether the group moved hotels. I only remember that nobody wanted to sleep with the lights completely off after the breakfast conversation. We may have left the television on low. We may have kept a bathroom light on. We may have tried to joke our way through it, but none of us really forgot what had happened. Years passed. Life moved on the way it does. Middle school ended. High school came and went. People moved, got jobs, got married, had families, or simply lost touch. I do not stay in contact with everyone from that room anymore. But I still keep in touch with one of the guys. Not constantly, but enough that we see each other once in a while or talk now and then. And every time the Washington, D.C. trip comes up, the chair comes up too. It is strange how something that happened when you were 13 or 14 can stay so sharp in your mind. I can still picture that hotel room, the 2 beds, the carpet, the unfamiliar darkness, the old chair in the corner, and the silhouette of a man sitting there with a shape that looked like a suit and a fedora. My friend remembers it too. Whenever we talk about it, we both get goosebumps. We still do not know what happened. Maybe all of us were exhausted and had similar dreams because we were in an unfamiliar room. Maybe the dim light from outside cast a shadow against the chair in just the right way. Maybe there was luggage somewhere nearby that created a shape, and our brains filled in the rest. Maybe one person saw it first, reacted without saying anything, and somehow the fear spread through the room even while we slept. There are normal explanations. There usually are. But the part that still bothers me is that none of us spoke about it until breakfast. We each saw something separately. We each thought we were probably imagining it. And when one guy finally asked if someone had been sitting in the chair, the rest of us realized we had all seen the same thing. A man-shaped figure, a dark suit, a fedora-like hat, sitting quietly in the corner of an old hotel room in Washington, D.C. Then, by morning, the chair was empty. And all these years later, neither of us can talk about it without getting that same cold feeling again. We will return to the next story in just a moment. If you have been enjoying the tapes so far, subscribing to Last Lantern Tapes is the best way to make sure you do not miss the next collection. New stories arrive for the late hours when the world is quiet and every shadow feels a little closer. You can also leave a like or share the story that unsettled you most tonight. Now, let's go back to the tape. That does not mean I think people are always lying when they say they saw something strange. I know people can have experiences they genuinely cannot explain. I know fear can make ordinary things feel much worse than they are. I know memories can change over time, especially when a story gets repeated for years. But I have also seen enough so-called ghost stories turn into normal explanations that I usually look for the obvious answer first. My family, on the other hand, has always loved a good ghost story. There were stories about shadows in hallways, strange knocks in old houses, voices heard in empty rooms, and photographs that supposedly captured faces nobody remembered seeing at the time. Every family gathering seemed to have at least one moment where someone brought up a creepy memory from years ago and everyone else added a detail to make it more dramatic. The most famous story in our family was about an Easter dinner picture taken at my aunt's house. The photo had been taken years before I was old enough to understand why everyone found it scary. It showed the family gathered around after dinner. People were sitting or standing in the living room, smiling for the camera, holding plates, talking, doing normal family stuff. Behind them was a fish tank, and in the glass of the fish tank was what looked like a face. Not a vague shape, not a shadow that could be anything. It looked like a real person's face staring out from behind the family. Every Easter or every other holiday, someone would pull out that picture. They would point at the face in the tank and start telling the story again. They said it was a ghost. They said nobody had been standing there when the photo was taken. They said the house had always felt strange. Some people in the family had their own theories. Maybe it was a previous owner. Maybe it was someone connected to the land. Maybe it was a spirit that had attached itself to the house. When I was little, I believed it, or at least I was scared enough by it that I did not question it. I would stare at that face in the fish tank and feel a strange chill every time. It looked unsettling because it was a face where there should not have been a face. Then I got older. By the time I was around 13, something in the way I thought about things had changed. I started noticing details. I started looking at the background of photos instead of only the creepy part people were pointing at. I started thinking about reflections, angles, light, and how cameras could capture things that looked strange when you did not know what you were seeing. That year, when the Easter picture came out again, I looked at it for longer than I usually did. Then I noticed something. In other photos taken at my aunt's house, you could clearly see that the television sat directly across from the fish tank. The glass on the fish tank reflected the room. In one of the other pictures from that same day, the TV was visible, and there was a movie playing. There was a man's face on the screen. Bob Hope. The so-called ghost face in the fish tank was not a dead relative, a stranger, or some haunted figure standing behind the family. It was Bob Hope reflected in the glass from whatever movie happened to be playing on the television. Once I pointed it out, it seemed obvious. At first, some people laughed. Some did not want to admit it because the ghost story had become part of the family's tradition. But the more we compared the photos, the clearer it was. The face in the fish tank matched the actor on the TV. The angle matched. The reflection made sense. That was one of the first times I remember feeling certain that a creepy story could have a completely normal answer. After that, I became the person in the family who ruined ghost stories. Someone would say they heard footsteps in an old house, and I would ask whether the heating had been running or whether someone was upstairs. Someone would say they saw a face in a window, and I would ask if there had been a reflection from a car or TV. Someone would show a blurry image, and I would point out the glare, the shadow, the strange camera angle, or whatever else it might be. I was not trying to be cruel about it. I just did not like jumping straight to ghosts. I wanted proof. I wanted something that could not be explained by a reflection, a bad memory, a strange sound in an old building, or somebody simply getting scared in the dark. But there was one story I never managed to dismiss completely. It was a story my grandmother told me. She told it to me first when I was around 7 years old. I was probably too young to hear it properly, because after she finished, I could not stop thinking about it. I remember being afraid to look into dark hallways for a while. I remember lying in bed and imagining something running toward me through fog. I remember trying to picture the face she described and then wishing I could stop. She told me again when I was around 10. By then, I had started asking more questions. I wanted to know where it happened, what time it was, whether anyone else saw it, and whether she ever found out who the person was. She answered as much as she could, but there were no answers that made it less strange. Then, she told me a final time when I was around 14. That time, she drew the person for me. I still have the drawing somewhere, packed away in a box with old family papers and random things I have never been able to throw away. I have not looked at it in a long time. I do not even know where exactly it is now, but I remember enough about it to know that it disturbed me deeply. Not because it was a perfect drawing, my grandmother was not an artist, but because she had remembered it for so long. She remembered the shape of the face. She remembered the way the features looked stretched. She remembered the strange nose. She remembered the expression, or whatever had been in place of an expression. And she remembered the sound. The sound was the part that always stayed with me. My grandmother lived in the Netherlands when she was young. This was during World War II, when she was training to become a nurse. It was a frightening time to be young anywhere in Europe, and she had already seen more hardship and uncertainty than most people should ever have to see. There were rules, shortages, danger, rumors, soldiers, fear, and the feeling that normal life could change overnight. She was not someone who told made-up stories for attention. That was important. She could be warm and funny, and she loved telling family stories. But she was not dramatic about things. When she spoke about the war, she did not turn it into entertainment. She talked about it quietly, usually only when someone asked. Some memories she would mention only once and then change the subject. This was one of the few strange stories she returned to more than once. According to her, she had been walking home through the village one evening. It was extremely foggy, not just misty or a little hazy, the kind of fog that swallows the world around you. She said she could not see more than maybe 15 feet ahead of her. The houses along the street would appear only when she was almost beside them. Trees became dark outlines. Fences disappeared into white. Even the road beneath her feet seemed to fade away after a few steps. She knew the route home well. It was her village. She had walked those roads before. She knew where the turns were, where the houses stood, and where the paths narrowed. But that night, the fog made everything feel unfamiliar. She said the village was unusually quiet. No voices, No carts, no people talking from behind windows, no doors opening or closing. Only the muffled sound of her own footsteps and the damp silence of the fog around her. At first, she was only uncomfortable. Fog can do that. It changes how sound travels. It makes things seem farther away than they are, then suddenly much closer. A dog barking on the other side of a field can sound as if it is standing behind you. Footsteps can echo strangely. You lose your sense of distance because you cannot see far enough to judge where anything is. She kept walking. Then she heard something behind her. At first it was faint, a sound that did not seem to belong to the foggy street. She stopped and listened. It sounded almost like someone running, not walking. Running, the sound was coming from somewhere behind her, hidden in the fog. She could hear footsteps or the movement of someone approaching quickly, though she could not see anyone. She turned around. There was nothing there, only the white-gray fog filling the road. She could barely make out the vague line of the street disappearing behind her. The houses were gone. The trees were gone. Everything had been swallowed by the mist. Then she heard another sound. Google-loo, Google-loo. That is how she described it. Not a word she recognized, not a shout, not laughter, not crying. A strange, repeated noise that sounded almost playful at first, but became more disturbing the longer she heard it. Google-loo, Google-loo. She said it sounded like someone was making the noise with their voice, but it did not sound natural. It was too high in some parts, too low in others. It had a strange wobble to it, like a person trying to imitate an animal or speak with something wrong in their mouth. The sound got louder, and the running got closer. My grandmother stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. She could not see the person. She could only hear them coming. She said the sound and the running seemed to be connected. Every time she heard that strange Google-loo noise, the footsteps sounded closer. The fog made it impossible to tell exactly where the person was, but she knew they were approaching fast. At first, she thought it might be someone from the village, maybe a child playing a joke, maybe someone drunk, maybe somebody trying to scare her because it was wartime and people had become strange from fear and stress. But the farther the sound carried through the fog, the less normal it felt. Google-loo, Google-loo, closer, closer. Then, suddenly, the person broke through the fog. They were right in front of her. My grandmother always paused a little when she reached this part of the story, not because she was trying to make it scarier, because even decades later, she seemed to remember the shock of it. She said the figure was human-shaped. It was dressed like a person. It was standing close enough that she could see the face clearly. But something about the face was wrong. Not injured, not bloody, not obviously monstrous. Just wrong in a way she could not make sense of. She said the person's features looked stretched, almost as if someone had pulled them sideways or downward. The face did not sit naturally. The eyes, mouth, and cheeks looked like they belonged in the right places, but they did not line up correctly. The nose was the strangest part. She said it wobbled, not slightly, the way a person's nose might move if they were breathing heavily or trembling from cold. She said it seemed loose or unstable, moving in a way that made her feel sick to look at, like it was not properly attached to the face. The figure was close enough that she could see all of this. And then it reached out. My grandmother said it touched her shoulders, both shoulders, not violently enough to knock her down, but firmly enough that she felt it. She remembered the hands. She remembered the pressure. She remembered how cold and frightened she felt. Then the figure made that sound again. Google-loo, Google-loo, and ran off. Just like that. It passed her, disappeared back into the fog, and was gone. My grandmother stood in the road for a moment, frozen. She did not chase after it. She did not call out. She did not turn around and try to see where it had gone. She just stood there, trying to understand what had happened. Then she ran home. She told people what she saw, or at least she tried to. But there was no explanation. Nobody knew who it could have been. No one came forward to say they had been playing a joke. No one in the village was known for wearing strange clothes or running through the fog at night, making those sounds. My grandmother never saw the person again. Not on that road. Not anywhere in the village. Not in the years afterward. She never found out who it was. And that was what made the story stay with her. You can explain a lot of frightening things when you find the person responsible. Someone was drunk. Someone was mentally unwell. Someone was playing a cruel prank. Someone had a physical condition that made their appearance unusual. Someone was trying to scare a young woman walking home alone. Those explanations would still be disturbing, but they would be explanations. My grandmother never got one. She only had the memory of walking through fog, hearing someone running toward her, hearing that strange repeated sound, and then seeing a face that did not seem right. When she first told me the story, I was too young to think about it logically. I only imagined the creature from her description. I imagined it standing in the fog, close enough to touch her. I imagined the stretched face and wobbling nose. I imagined the strange sound getting louder as it ran closer. At 7 years old, that was enough to give me nightmares. When she told me again around 10, I was still scared, but I started trying to understand it. Maybe it had been a person with some kind of facial injury. Maybe the fog had distorted what she saw. Maybe the person had been wearing a mask. Maybe war had pushed someone into a mental state where they were acting in a strange and frightening way. Maybe my grandmother had been tired, scared, and alone, and her memory changed as the years passed. Those were the explanations I held on to. They were not perfect, but they were better than thinking that something inhuman had run out of the fog toward her. Then she told me again when I was around 14. By then, I had become the kid who debunked family ghost stories. I had already figured out the fish tank picture. I had already started rolling my eyes whenever someone claimed an old house was haunted because it creaked at night. I was old enough to understand how reflections worked and how memories could be unreliable. So when she brought up the story again, I tried to listen like a skeptic. I asked questions. How far away was the figure when she first saw it? Could the fog have distorted its face? Was it dark? Did she know what people in the village looked like? Did she ever mention it to anyone else? Could it have been someone wearing a costume? Could it have been a prank? She did not get angry at my questions. She just answered as best she could. She said the person had been close enough that there was no mist between them by the time they touched her shoulders. She said she had seen the face clearly. She said it was not a mask because the face moved, though she could not explain how it moved. She said the person made the strange noise before they reached her and again after touching her. Then she drew it. I watched her sketch the shape of the head, the stretched features, and the nose. The drawing was not something I could look at for long. It was not detailed in a realistic way, but it had an uncomfortable quality. The face looked human enough that you could understand what you were seeing, but distorted enough that your brain wanted to reject it. The eyes were too far apart or too strangely placed. The mouth looked wrong. The nose seemed to sag or bend. It looked like the drawing of someone who had seen a person through a nightmare. And the thing that got to me was that my grandmother did not seem to be inventing it as she drew. She was remembering. I could see that in the pauses she took, in the way she would stop and say, "No, it was more like this," then adjust a line. She was trying to get it right. She was trying to capture something she had seen many years before and had never forgotten. That disturbed me more than the drawing itself. I do not know what happened to her that night. I still do not believe every strange encounter means something supernatural. There are too many ways people can be mistaken, especially in darkness, fog, fear, and difficult situations. World War II was a brutal time, and people were under enormous pressure. Someone could have been injured, frightened, mentally unwell, or trying to hide from something. The fog could have changed the way a face looked. Panic could have made a strange encounter feel even more impossible. All of that is possible. But I also understand why the story has stayed with me for so long. Because my grandmother was not telling it like a campfire story. She did not tell it to make herself seem special. She did not claim she had seen a ghost, demon, or monster. She only told me what happened. She walked home through a foggy village. She heard someone running toward her. She heard a strange sound, google-loo, growing louder in the mist. Then a person appeared directly in front of her, with a face that looked stretched and wrong. That person touched her shoulders, made the sound again, and ran back into the fog. She never learned who it was. She never saw them again. And somewhere in a box, among old things I have not looked through in years, is a drawing of the face she remembered. I have spent most of my life finding the logical answer to stories that scared other people. But that one has never had an answer that feels complete. My mom, my sister, and I lived way out in the country at the time. Not just a little outside town, but real backroads country, where houses were spread far apart, roads were narrow and poorly lit, and the trees seemed to go on forever once the sun went down. People called it the sticks for a reason. There were long driveways, fields, thick woods, and stretches of road where you could drive for several minutes without passing another car or seeing a porch light. During the day, it was quiet and peaceful. At night, it felt completely different. Once it got dark, there was almost no light anywhere except what came from the houses. You could stand outside and see the stars clearly because there were no streetlights or city glow. But that also meant there were huge areas of darkness between one house and the next. You could hear sounds from far away, like dogs barking on another property, trucks going down a distant road, or animals moving through the brush. Sometimes it was normal. Sometimes it made you feel like something was closer than it really was. Most of the time, though, we did not think much about it. It was home. You get used to a place when you live there. You get used to the long walks to the mailbox, the darkness outside the windows, the creaking trees in the wind, and the way every house feels isolated once night comes. Then something happened at a nearby house that changed the feeling of the whole area. There was a man living at one of the neighboring houses. He was not right beside us, but out there, neighbor could still mean a house down the road or across a stretch of land. One day, people found out that he had taken his own life inside his home and left a note behind. It was already disturbing enough because things like that hit differently in a small rural area. There are not many people around, so everyone hears about it. News travels through relatives, neighbors, people at stores, and people who know someone connected to the family. Even if nobody gives you all the details, you hear enough to know that something awful happened. But then more stories started going around. Apparently, some of the man's relatives said the handwriting on the note did not look like his handwriting. They claimed they did not recognize it at all. I do not know whether that was true, whether grief made them question things, or whether people were repeating it differently from how it was originally said. In a small area, stories grow fast. One person says something uncertain, and by the time it gets repeated a few times, people talk about it like it is a fact. Still, that was only the beginning. The strangest part came from a woman who lived across the street from him. She had been sitting on her porch the night it happened. She said she had seen a man come out of the house. At first, that did not sound impossible. Maybe it was the homeowner. Maybe it was a friend, neighbor, relative, or someone coming and going. But the way she described him made everyone uncomfortable. She said he was dressed completely in black, not just dark clothes, tight black clothing that clung to his whole body. She said it looked almost like a scuba suit, the kind of smooth, dark material that covered him from neck to ankles. The way she described him made it sound like he was wearing something that did not fit the area, the weather, or the setting at all. Then she described his eyes. She said they were bright blue, not normal blue eyes reflecting porch light, not pale eyes that looked bright in the dark. She said they glowed, sharp and vivid, like little blue LED lights shining from inside his face. That was the detail that stuck with people. A man in black clothing could be anyone. People could see things wrong at night. Shadows can make clothing look strange. Distance can change the way a person's body looks. But glowing blue eyes were not something people could easily brush off. The woman swore on everything that she saw him leave the house. She said he moved quickly, almost too smoothly, then disappeared into the darkness. Nobody knew what to make of it. Some people said she must have been mistaken. Some said grief and fear had made the story bigger. Some said maybe it was someone wearing strange clothes, a person trying to scare people, or someone connected to the house who did not want to be seen. Others immediately decided it was something supernatural. They started calling it the Scuba Man. That was not an official name. It was just something people said because nobody knew what else to call the figure the woman had described. In a small rural area, stories like that take on a life of their own. Every person who tells it adds a little more. Someone says the eyes were blue, the next person says they were glowing. Then someone says the figure did not walk like a person. Before long, people are driving past the house slowly at night, staring at the windows, wondering whether they will see something move. At first, I did not take it that seriously. It was creepy. Sure, anybody would think it was creepy. But I also knew that stories become bigger when people are scared. I had heard enough rumors in my life to know that nobody tells something exactly the same way twice. I figured there was probably a normal explanation somewhere in the middle of it all. Maybe the note really had been written by him, and the relatives were just struggling to accept it. Maybe the woman had seen a person in dark clothes, and the lighting made their eyes look strange. Maybe there had been a reflection from a porch light, a car, or something else that made the color stand out. That was what I told myself. Then, about a week later, my mom was in the bathroom when she screamed. Not a normal startled scream. Not a yell because she saw a bug or dropped something. She screamed in a way I had never heard from her before. It was loud, raw, and completely terrified. My sister and I both heard it right away. We rushed toward the bathroom, not knowing what had happened. For a second, I thought she had fallen. I thought maybe she had hurt herself or seen something dangerous outside. My sister and I got to the door fast, and when we saw her, she looked panicked. She was pale. Her breathing was quick and uneven. She was staring toward the bathroom mirror as if she could not make herself look away from it. The bathroom had one of those angled mirrors that reflected part of the room, but also caught a view outside through the window, depending on where you stood. It was not a huge window, but from the right angle, you could see the dark yard, part of the trees, and the space outside the house. My mom kept saying she had seen eyes. At first, I did not understand what she meant. She said there had been something outside. She said that when she looked in the mirror, she saw two glowing bright blue eyes watching her from outside the window. She was not saying she thought she saw them. She was not saying she caught something out of the corner of her eye. She was insisting that she had looked into the mirror and seen them clearly. Two bright blue eyes, just outside. Watching, for a second, my sister and I were both too shocked to say much. The bathroom suddenly felt too small. The whole house felt too quiet. I remember looking toward the window and then toward the mirror, trying to see what my mom had seen. But there was nothing there now, just darkness outside. The trees, the yard, maybe some reflection from inside the bathroom, but no face and no eyes. My mom was still panicking. She kept repeating that the eyes had been there, that they were bright blue, that they had been looking straight at her. My sister was visibly freaked out. I was scared too, but I was trying to be the calm one. When people panic, sometimes you automatically become the person who talks them down, even when you are not convinced yourself. So I started trying to explain it away. I said something like, "It's nothing. I'm sure that story about the scuba man has you paranoid too." I meant it as reassurance. I thought she had heard the story going around about the neighbor's house. I thought maybe the idea had gotten into her head, and when she saw a reflection or movement outside, her brain connected it to the blue-eyed figure everyone had been talking about. But my mom looked at me and said, "What scuba man?" The second she said that, my stomach dropped. I remember standing there, staring at her. She had no idea what I was talking about. She had not heard about the neighbor's death beyond the basic news of it, if she had heard anything at all. She had not heard the rumors about the note. She had not heard about the woman on the porch. She had not heard about the man in black clothing. And she definitely had not heard the story about glowing blue eyes. That meant she had not been influenced by it. She had not been sitting there thinking about a strange blue-eyed figure outside the window. She had simply looked into the mirror and seen glowing blue eyes on her own. The room went silent for a moment. I do not remember who told her the story first. It may have been me. It may have been my sister asking questions. But eventually, we told her about the neighbor, the note, the woman across the street, the figure in black, and the blue lead-like eyes. The more we told her, the worse she looked. She kept shaking her head. She said that was exactly what she saw. She said the eyes in the mirror had not looked like an animal's eyes. They were too bright, too blue, too close together in a way that made her think they belonged to a person looking in. My sister and I started panicking too after that. I wish I could say we handled it calmly. I wish I could say we checked the yard properly, turned on all the outside lights, and looked for a reasonable explanation. But we were scared. The whole situation had gone from Mom saw something strange in the mirror to Mom saw the same detail from a story she had never heard. That was enough to make us lose it. We looked outside, but the yard was dark. There was no one standing near the window, no car in the driveway, no obvious footprints that we could see from inside, no movement in the trees. But the darkness around the house suddenly felt enormous. Every shadow looked like it might be a person standing still. Every dark patch between the trees looked like a place someone could hide. We started talking over one another. My mom wanted to leave. My sister wanted to know whether the doors were locked. I was trying to keep everyone focused while also feeling the same fear pressing down on me. We did not stay. We grabbed what we needed and got out of the house. I do not remember whether we left every light on or whether we locked up carefully before leaving. I just remember the urgency of getting into the car, that feeling of not wanting to stand outside any longer than necessary, the feeling that if we looked toward the trees, we might see something looking back. We left and did not come back for a few days. Even after we were gone, I kept thinking about what my mom said. I wanted to believe it was a reflection. Maybe there had been some light from inside the bathroom catching in the mirror. Maybe something outside had reflected blue somehow. Maybe she had seen an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, and her fear made the eyes seem too bright. But she had not heard the story. That was the part I could not get past. If she had known about the blue-eyed figure, I could have explained it as suggestion. You hear a creepy rumor, your brain is already on edge, and then you see something ambiguous outside. That happens all the time. But she had not heard anything. She saw glowing blue eyes, and only afterward did we tell her that a neighbor had claimed to see a black-clothed man with glowing blue eyes leaving the house where the man had died. That was the moment the whole thing stopped feeling like a simple rumor. There was another strange thing that happened at that house too, though it was a completely different kind of fear. One day I came home from school on the bus. It was an ordinary afternoon. I got off at my usual stop and started walking toward the house. I remember the feeling of being tired from school, probably thinking about food, homework, or whatever dumb things had happened that day. The route from the bus stop to the house was familiar. I had walked it countless times. As I got closer, I noticed something wrong. The front door was wide open. Not cracked, not slightly unlatched, wide open. I stopped walking. At first, I thought maybe my mom had gotten home early, but I knew she was not supposed to be home yet. The timing was wrong. My sister was not home either. Nobody should have been inside. The door being open immediately made me nervous. Out in the country, an open front door does not always mean something is wrong. People forget things. Someone might have stepped out to check the mail. A door might not have latched properly. Wind can push a poorly closed door open. But this was not just a door sitting slightly open. It looked like someone had opened it and left it that way. I started walking more slowly. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The house was quiet. There was no television playing, no voices, no movement, no sign that my mom had come home and was doing something inside. I remember taking quiet steps, almost without thinking about it. I did not want to announce myself. I did not want someone inside to know I was there if there was someone inside. My mind started running through possibilities. Maybe somebody had broken in. Maybe my mom had come home briefly and left again. Maybe the wind had opened the door. Maybe an animal got inside. Maybe there was nothing wrong and I was overreacting. But I could not make myself believe that last one. I got closer. Maybe 10 feet from the front door, something moved inside the house. At first, I only saw a shape. Then a huge dog came into view. It stepped out from somewhere deeper inside the house and appeared in the open doorway. I froze. It was big. Not just a medium-sized dog that had wandered in. It looked huge from where I was standing, especially because I had already convinced myself that something was wrong. The dog filled the doorway, and for a second I could not tell whether it was friendly, scared, aggressive, or guarding something inside. All I knew was that I was standing outside my own house, the front door was wide open, nobody was supposed to be home, and there was a huge, unfamiliar dog inside. The dog looked at me. I looked at the dog. For 1 second, everything felt still. Then it started running toward me. I did not move. I should have run. I should have backed away. I should have yelled. But I was completely frozen. My body just refused to react. I stood there staring as this huge dog ran straight at me from inside the house. I remember thinking, this is it. It is going to bite me. The dog got closer and closer. Then it reached me, and instead of attacking, it turned out to be completely friendly. It wagged its tail, pushed close to me, and acted like it was happy to see someone. It may have jumped a little or sniffed around me. I do not remember every small movement because I was so relieved that it had not tried to hurt me. I let out the biggest sigh of relief. My heart had been pounding so hard that I could feel it in my chest. 1 second I thought I was about to be attacked outside my own house. The next second I was standing there with a big friendly dog, acting like it had just found a new friend. I gave it some attention, then carefully went inside. The house looked normal. Nothing was knocked over. Nothing was missing that I could tell. There was no sign of a break-in. No strange person waiting in a room. No obvious reason for the door to be opened. The dog was just there, inside our house, friendly as could be. I checked around as best as I could. Everything seemed okay. I shut the front door, locked it, and tried to figure out how the dog had gotten inside in the first place. Maybe it had pushed the door open. Maybe somebody had left it open without realizing. Maybe the dog belonged to someone nearby and had wandered in while the door was open. Maybe it had somehow gotten through another entrance and ended up inside. I never really found out. The whole thing was strange, but at least that one had a comforting ending. The dog was harmless. It was scared or lost or curious, and it happened to be inside when I got home. Still, the memory stayed with me because of how afraid I was before I knew it was friendly. That house and that area always had a strange feeling after the blue eye incident. Maybe it was only because we had been scared by the neighbor's story. Maybe living far out in the country made every odd event feel bigger than it was. Maybe the darkness, isolation, and rumors made us connect things that had nothing to do with each other. A man's death in a nearby house. A story about strange handwriting. A neighbor claiming to see a dark figure with blue eyes. My mom seeing bright blue eyes in a bathroom mirror without knowing the story. An open front door. A huge dog inside the house. Any one of those things might have had a normal explanation, but when you put them together, they are hard to forget. I still do not know what my mom saw that night. I do not know if it was a reflection, an animal, a person outside the house, or something our minds will never make sense of. I do know that she had never heard the story about the scuba suit man, and when I told her what people had been saying, the color drained from her face because the glowing blue eyes she saw in the mirror matched the exact detail she could not possibly have known. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the rumors, not the story people told about the neighbor's house, not even the fear of standing outside my own home while a huge dog ran toward me. It was the way my mom said, "What scuba man?" Because in that one moment, I realized she had not been scared by a story. She had seen something first, and then the story found her. When I was still living with my parents, I had one experience in their house that I have never been able to fully explain. It was not a long series of strange events. There were no repeated voices, no objects flying around, no shadows appearing every night, and no history of weird things happening in the house. In fact, that is part of what has always made this one moment stand out so much. It happened once, it was sudden, and then nothing like it ever happened again. At the time, I was working and living at home. I had gotten used to coming back from work tired, wanting nothing more than to eat something, shower, sit down, and turn my brain off for a while. The routine was always more or less the same. I would pull into the driveway, walk inside, drop my things somewhere near the entrance, and check whether anyone else was home. That day I had just arrived back from work. I do not remember exactly what day of the week it was, what the weather was like, or what I had been doing at work. All of those details have faded because they were ordinary. Nothing about the day had felt strange before I got home. It was just another shift, another drive back, another evening where I expected the house to be quiet. When I walked in, I realized I was alone. That was normal enough. My parents were sometimes out running errands, visiting family, or doing whatever they needed to do. My brother was not home either. The house was empty, and there was nothing unusual about that. I had been alone in the house plenty of times before. I knew the sounds it made. I knew what the refrigerator sounded like when it kicked on. I knew how the heating or air system sounded through the vents. I knew which floorboards creaked and which doors made a noise when they opened. It was a normal house. It was not some old, falling-apart place in the middle of nowhere. It was not a house with a long history of people dying inside it. It was not one of those places where everyone in the family had a ghost story ready to tell. My parents were only the second owners of the home. It had been built by one builder, and that builder was still alive. As far as we knew, nobody had died on the property. Nobody had been murdered there. Nobody had disappeared there. There were no stories passed down from previous families about footsteps in the attic or a figure in the hallway. The house had always been ordinary. That was why I never expected anything unusual to happen. After getting home, I went downstairs to use the bathroom. It was a regular downstairs bathroom, nothing special about it. It was one of those rooms you never really think about until something happens in it. The walls, the sink, the toilet, the mirror, the little things sitting around on the counter, all of it was familiar. I had used that bathroom countless times over the years. I went in, shut the door, and sat down. The house was quiet. I could hear the normal background sounds you hear when you are alone in a house. A faint hum from somewhere. Maybe the refrigerator. Maybe the air system. Maybe pipes settling. Nothing that made me nervous. Nothing that made me think somebody else was in the house. Then, without warning, something slammed hard against the bathroom door. Bang, bang, bang. 3 loud impacts. Not light knocking. Not a gentle tap. Not the kind of sound you hear when someone accidentally bumps into a door while walking past. It sounded like somebody had hit the door hard with their hand, their fist, or their body. The first slam made me jump. The second one made my heart drop. The third one made me completely freeze. For a second, I honestly assumed it was my brother. That was the most logical explanation. I was in the bathroom, he had come home, and he was being an asshole or trying to mess with me. It would not have been completely impossible. Brothers do stupid things. Someone hears the bathroom door shut, decides to be annoying, and pounds on it, just to get a reaction. So I yelled out something like, "I'm taking a shit." I said it loudly, partly because I was irritated, and partly because I thought whoever was outside would answer back. But nobody answered. There was no laugh, no voice, no comment from my brother, no footsteps moving away. Nothing. The silence after those 3 slams was worse than the slams themselves. At first, I sat there waiting. I expected to hear someone walk down the hallway. I expected the floor to creak. I expected my brother to say something stupid through the door. I expected to hear a car door close outside if someone had just come home. I expected some sign that there was a normal person on the other side of that bathroom door. But there was nothing. The house was completely quiet again. I remember listening as hard as I could. When you are scared, every small sound becomes louder. You start trying to separate normal noises from anything that does not belong. You listen for breathing. You listen for a footstep. You listen for the sound of someone shifting their weight outside the door. I heard nothing. That was when the situation stopped feeling like a joke. If it had been my brother, he would have said something. If it had been one of my parents, they would have called my name or asked if I was okay. If someone had accidentally hit the door, they would have made some kind of sound, even just an apology or a confused comment. But after the 3 slams, it was as if nobody had ever been there. I sat in that bathroom for longer than I probably needed to. I did not immediately jump up and open the door. I wanted to, but I also did not. Part of me was telling myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe the door had shaken because something fell nearby. Maybe some pressure change in the house had caused a strange sound. Maybe a large object had slipped against the wall. But I knew what I had heard. It had sounded like 3 separate hard hits. There was a rhythm to it. Bang, 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 and it had come directly from the other side of the bathroom door. Eventually, I finished up and stood there for a second, staring at the door. I remember putting my hand near the handle without turning it right away. The door suddenly felt like a barrier between me and something I did not understand. On one side was the familiar bathroom where I had been sitting a moment earlier. On the other side was the hallway, the rest of the empty house, and whatever had slammed against the door. I tried to tell myself one last time that it was probably my brother. Maybe he had come in quietly. Maybe he had decided to mess with me, then walked away quickly before I answered. Maybe I had simply not heard him leave because I was sitting in the bathroom with the fan on, or because the house was quiet enough to make sound carry strangely. But even that did not sit right with me. The impacts had been hard. If someone had hit the door that hard, they would have been standing immediately outside it. There was no way they could have disappeared silently without me hearing anything at all. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. No one was standing there. No one was walking away. No one was hiding around the corner. The lights in the house were off, except for the areas I had turned on. The room outside the bathroom looked exactly as it always did. Nothing was knocked over. Nothing had fallen. No picture frame had come off the wall. No furniture had shifted. There was no visible explanation for the sound. I stepped out of the bathroom and looked down both ends of the hallway. Nothing. At that point, I started feeling something much heavier than simple surprise. It was fear, but not the kind where you scream and run away immediately. It was the kind that makes you think through possibilities as fast as you can. You start asking yourself whether someone could have gotten into the house. You start wondering whether a door was left unlocked. You think about windows. You think about people hiding in rooms. You think about whether someone has been in the house longer than you realized. Even though the bathroom door slam had felt strange, the possibility of an actual person in the house was more frightening. So I went and got my pistol. I am not saying that because I wanted to feel tough or because I was looking for a confrontation. I got it because I was alone. I had just heard what sounded like someone striking the bathroom door, and there was no answer when I called out. I did not know whether somebody had broken in, whether someone was hiding, or whether the house was actually empty. At that moment, I needed to make sure. I checked the house carefully. Every room, every area that someone could reasonably be hiding. I moved slowly through the downstairs first, looking into the living room, the kitchen, closets, and any space where a person could be. I checked behind doors. I looked into rooms that were dark. I listened before turning corners. My heart was pounding the entire time because every shadow looked wrong once you are already scared. The house was familiar, but it did not feel familiar then. A room you have walked through thousands of times can feel completely different when you believe someone might be hiding in it. The kitchen looked too dark. The living room had too many corners. The hallway seemed longer. Every closed door felt like something waiting behind it. I kept expecting to find my brother. That was still the explanation I wanted. I wanted to open a door and find him trying not to laugh. I wanted him to jump out and tell me he had been messing with me. I would have been angry, but I would have been relieved. But he was not there. I checked downstairs. Nothing. I checked upstairs. Nothing. I looked in bedrooms. Nothing. I checked closets. Nothing. I checked the rooms my parents usually used, even though I knew they were not home. Nothing. I checked the garage area and other parts of the house where someone might have entered or hidden. Nothing. Every door was as it should have been. Every room was empty. There was no sign of forced entry, no open window, no stranger's belongings, no dropped item, no sound from another room. The house was empty. I was alone. By the time I finished going through the entire place, I had no idea what to think. The fact that I did not find anyone should have made me feel better. In some ways it did. At least there was no intruder waiting in a closet. At least I had not walked into a dangerous situation without knowing it. At least there was nobody inside the house trying to hurt me. But it also made the door slam harder to explain. Because if no one was there, then what had hit the bathroom door? I went back toward the downstairs bathroom and stood in the hallway again. The door looked completely normal. There were no marks on it, no dents that I could see, no signs that someone had kicked it or punched it. The handle was still in place. The hinges looked fine. The wall around it looked normal. I stood there listening. Nothing. No second knock. No sound from inside the bathroom. No footsteps overhead. No voice. No movement. It was as if the house had returned to normal the second I opened the door. For the rest of that evening, I stayed on edge. I do not remember whether I sat in the living room with the television on or whether I went to my room. I probably kept lights on. I probably checked the locks more than once. I probably jumped at every normal sound the house made after that. When you have one unexplained moment like that, your brain starts treating every small thing as connected to it. A vent rattles, and you wonder if it is the same sound. A floorboard creaks, and you stop breathing for a second. The refrigerator turns on, and you look down the hallway. A car passes outside, and you wonder if someone is pulling into the driveway. Even though nothing else happened, I could not relax properly. Eventually, my parents came home. Maybe my brother came home later too. I do not remember exactly how the evening unfolded after that. But I remember asking whether anyone had stopped by the house. I remember wondering if someone had come in and left without me noticing. I remember trying to think of any explanation that did not involve something impossible. Nobody had been there. Nobody said they had knocked on the bathroom door. Nobody had heard anything unusual. My brother had not been playing a joke. My parents had not come home early. There was no simple explanation. That was the only weird thing that has ever happened in that house. That matters to me. If the place had been full of strange stories, maybe I would be more willing to call it haunted. If people had heard voices in the hallway, seen shadows in bedrooms, or had doors opening on their own for years, then maybe the bathroom incident would feel like part of a larger pattern. But there was nothing else. My parents were the second owners of the house. The original builder was still alive. As far as we know, nobody had died there. There was no tragic history tied to the property. There was no old graveyard under the house, no previous tenant who vanished, no murder, no suicide, no strange local story. It was an ordinary home, and that was the only time anything happened that I could not explain. I have tried to think about it logically. Maybe something fell in the hallway and struck the door in a strange way. But there was nothing there when I opened it. Maybe the heating or air system created pressure that made the door bang 3 times. But it did not sound like the house settling or a vent moving. It sounded like 3 hard impacts. Maybe somebody was outside the door and ran away before I opened it. But I searched the entire house and found no one. I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear a door open or close. I did not hear anyone leave. Maybe my brother did it and never admitted it. That remains possible, I guess. Siblings can keep jokes going for years. But he has never claimed it was him, and nothing about the timing made sense. If he had been there, he would have had to disappear completely before I left the bathroom. Maybe I was tired from work and misunderstood a normal sound. That is probably the explanation I have tried hardest to accept. I had just gotten home from work. I was tired. Maybe the house made several noises close together, and my brain turned them into 3 knocks. Maybe I heard something from another room, and it sounded as though it came from the door, but I still remember it too clearly. It was not vague. It was not a soft sound that could have come from anywhere. It was 3 violent slams against the bathroom door while I was sitting inside. Bang, 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 then silence. I do not know what caused it. I do not know whether it was a person, a strange coincidence, a house noise that happened in exactly the wrong way, or something I will never have an answer for. All I know is that I was alone in the house. I heard someone or something slam against the bathroom door 3 times, and when I came out and searched every room, there was nobody there. Nothing like it has happened since. Maybe that is what makes it scarier. It was not part of a pattern. It was not something I could get used to. It was just one moment, in an ordinary house, after an ordinary workday, when something happened that did not fit. And after all these years, I still do not know what was on the other side of that door. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.